Hi, welcome back. Today we are in Matthew 17. Um, the Transfiguration is where we will be starting. Again, I say this often, but if you haven't been with us, I would encourage you to go back and catch up to where we are. It's kind of hard sometimes to jump right into the middle of a Bible study and understand what's been going on, what's been said, and how it all interrelates. So, if you've been with us, great. We're starting in Matthew 17. Let's begin. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I'll make three tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Okay, so let's begin back at verse 1 where it says, And after 6 days, Jesus took with him. So this follows on the heels of what he just talked about in chapter 16 about how the disciples needed to take up their own cross, right? So Jesus had told them before this, just before this, he talks about his death and resurrection. Peter says to him, Hey, I'm not going to let that happen. Jesus says to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. And then he tells them they're going to have to take up their own cross if they're going to be his followers. And then he goes on to truly, the last verse of 16, Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So contextually, this follows right after that. So 6 days later. So this is why the transfiguration is partial fulfillment of what Jesus says here. The final fulfillment, of course, comes with the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. So he takes these three up the mountain, the inner circle, Peter, James, and John. And going up this mountain, Matthew kind of wants us to see that he's bringing to mind the glory of God, right? Of God himself when God was on the mountain and spoke to his people and they were to listen to God. So that's the image that Matthew is trying to provoke in his readers here. So not only do we have the transfiguration of Jesus, where it says his clothes became white as light, his face shone like the sun, but we also have Moses and Elijah. And so why are Moses and Elijah there? Well, Moses is the great mediator, right? And the lawgiver. Elijah is, of course, the great prophet in the Old Testament. They both went up to a mountain to speak with God. And so Matthew wants to see Jesus as the embodiment of, so there's a few things, right? So Matthew wants us to see Jesus as the embodiment of Israel's God, of this God that Moses, the great lawgiver, Elijah, the great prophet, went up the mountain to talk with. But Jesus is now God, Yahweh in the flesh, right? God incarnate. He is Emmanuel with us. So Moses represents, so some say Moses represents the law of the Old Testament, and then Elijah represents the prophets. So therefore, the total encapsulation of the Old Testament, right? So the law and the prophets are there with Jesus. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Others see that Moses himself represents the entirety of the Old Testament. That's what Moses, right? So the law, and then the New Testament, right? John talks about that in John's gospel. The law came through Moses, grace and truth through Jesus. So the law and the gospel. So Moses represents the entirety of the Old Testament there. The entire Old Testament that points to Christ, right, as God's salvation. And if you take that view that Moses is the entirety of the law of the Old Testament, then Elijah is there to show us that connection to John the Baptist, right? Remember, Elijah must come first. before the Christ, before the Messiah. And so Elijah shows up to show us that Elijah has come, but he's come in John, right? John functions as that, as Elijah in the gospel. So the end time has manifested itself. The law is there. Elijah, who has come first, it's manifested itself, and here now, everything that God has said is coming into fruition because God is here with His people in Jesus. So there's kind of two ways there you can look at that. Um, and maybe even a combination of both. So then we have that, and Peter, of course, being Peter, speaks up and says, "Hey, this is great. We're here to see this. To see you and Moses and Elijah." And people ask, "Well, how did he know that was Moses and Elijah?" Excuse me. I doubt they're wearing name tags, so let's just assume that this was a gift from God that God allowed them to realize what was happening, what was going on. So Peter wants to build them tents, and he appears to be lumping them all together. Hey, Jesus, he says, Lord, it's good that we're here. How about if I just make three tents? One for you because you guys are the big wigs. Moses is here, Elijah's here, and so you're here. So let's just build three tents for the three of you. And it appears then that Peter is kind of lumping these all three of them together, right? That in Peter's mind that these three are kind of a co-equal thing. But when he does this, it says, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved son with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." So the shadow comes and it's God's voice, and it's like when Moses and the Israelites finished the tabernacle as they were wandering in the desert. What happened when they finished that? Well, a cloud descended upon it, and that was God with his people, right? Dwelling with his people. The presence of God was there. He was tabernacling among them, right? In the tabernacle. Well, now here is God. The cloud has descended, and God is tabernacling among his people. But it is now Jesus, right? Jesus is tabernacling among his people. Again, this is what it says if you go to John 1. The word became flesh and dwelt among us. That word is actually tabernacled, right? So Jesus tabernacles here. So that is God as he comes down, telling us that, yes, and he says, "This is my son," right? I am now here in my son, Emmanuel, God with you. And of course, when he says, "This is my son," he's speaking to Jesus, right? About Jesus. This is my son, not Moses, not Elijah. He is not on equal plane with these two. This is God himself, right? My son is God himself. And he says, "Listen to him." Now, when he says, "Listen to him," it's not just a general, "Hey, listen to the things he says," which of course, okay, yes, that's part of what that means, right? Listen to what he says. But remember what this is coming on the heels of. This is coming on the heels of Jesus predicting his own passion, right? That he is going to die and will be resurrected. And to be his follower, you therefore must pick up your cross. You must be willing to die as well. And so this imperative to listen to Jesus is certainly there's a general connotation, but it's very specific here to listen to what he's been telling you about his impending death, and therefore, as his followers, you too will be picking up your cross. This, of course, and I get it, scares the bejeebers out of the three of them, Peter, James, and John, and they fall flat on their faces. Jesus, of course, says they fell on their faces and were terrified. Jesus, being full of grace and mercy, he comes to them, he touches them, and he says, "Rise and have no fear." The next time we hear something like that in Matthew's gospel is going to be actually at the resurrection. The angel speaking those very words, "Rise and have no fear." So that's kind of a interesting tidbit there. So when they did rise up again, they saw that everybody was gone, right? Moses and Elijah were gone. The cloud had ascended, and then just Jesus was there, and no longer glowing with the transfiguration. Then we get to verse 9. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one the vision. So tell no one what you just saw up here until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, then why did the scribes say that first Elijah must come? He answered, Elijah does come and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. So they're curious why they can't say anything to anybody because, wow, we just saw a spectacular sight here, Jesus. Why can't we share this? Uh, Elijah has come, and we know that he's the predecessor to all this. So obviously the time has come. Why don't we? Why can't we share what has gone on? This is, of course, referencing Malachi chapter 3. So Elijah's come. What's the problem? And Jesus affirms, he goes, yes, you're right. Of course, Elijah must come, and he has already come in the person of John the Baptist, right? That's what he's referring to. The disciples pick that up. They get it. He's referring to John. And Jesus says, of course, that they have done to John what they wanted to, right? Evil has had their way with him. And of course, evil will have its way with me as well. This tells us a couple things. One is that, yes, our world is full of evil, but what happens to Jesus is not um, outside of his purview, right? It is not evil getting the upper hand. Jesus knows what's coming. In fact, he is deliberately going there himself, right? So this is not evil orchestrating this, and Jesus is just a player, a pawn, and cannot stop what's happening and just being carried away by the tide. He knows what is coming, and he is actively making his way there. This is all under God's purview and command and purpose for our salvation. So, just as John suffered at the hands of evil people, so Jesus will too. And the disciples get that Jesus is talking about John the Baptist, but they just don't understand everything in regards to what Jesus says about himself. So, again, they're getting things and they're not getting things. Some things they pick up right away, and other things they struggle with. So now to 14. And when they came to the crowd, a man came up to him, kneeling before him, said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and he suffers terribly. For often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him. And Jesus answered, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? He said to them, Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Okay, so there's I probably say this a lot. Well, there's a lot in here. There just is. Scripture is full of a lot. So again, there's a lot in here. So they just come off the mountain. A man with a demon-possessed son comes and asks Jesus for help. And I brought him to your disciples, he says in verse 16, and they couldn't do anything. And then Jesus answers, O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me. And at first, it seems that maybe Jesus is saying these words to the Father, that boy, you don't have any faith, right? It's on you. Um, this is the problem. You're the problem, Dad. But really, these words are aimed at the disciples, right? This rebuke, these stern words are aimed at his disciples. Um, and he's frustrated with them, right? And this takes us back to Matthew 10 and what went on there. In fact, let's dive back really quick. So Matthew 10, and we'll see this playing out here. He called the 12, I'm in Matthew 10, verse 1. He called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every affliction. And then it goes on from there. And so Jesus, these words here that he speaks in Matthew 17, the words Jesus speaks are a stern rebuke of his disciples, and the fact that they are not getting things. So he's saying, you guys, right, to the disciples, you are faithless. I just told you, I just gave you this authority. You've done these things already. And here this man brought his son, and you couldn't do it, right? So he's not talking to the father, he's talking to the disciples. He says, bring the boy to me. Jesus rebukes the demon, he's cast out, and the boy is instantly healed. And then the disciples came to Jesus and said, well, why couldn't we do this? He says, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Um, so he says, because their little faith, their faith has not yet grown like that, like a mustard seed. It's still little, right? It hasn't grown. Jesus told them, right? He promised them, you can cast out demons, and then here they are, and they can't cast them out, right? Why? Um, because of their little faith that hasn't grown. They don't trust the words of Jesus at this point. Okay, it was there, but not here, or whatever. But for whatever reason, they're not trusting Jesus. And faith grows when it looks to Jesus, right? Through word and prayer. As we look to Jesus and His word, as we come to Jesus in prayer, our faith grows, and we grab hold of and trust those promises of Christ in our lives. Um, Probably here a big one that people struggle with is the forgiveness of sins, right? Are our sins forgiven? And we hear that, right? Oh, our sins are forgiven. And yet, how many Christians struggle with, oh, but I did this. Um, yes, I know He forgave me for that, but boy, man, I did this one. And so we might hear over and over again we're forgiven, but we still hold on to this. The more we hear the promises of Jesus, um, for instance, your sins are forgiven, uh, the more we can begin to trust those and say, yes, my sins are forgiven. They're forgiven not because of anything I've done, but because it's the promise of God. Jesus said so. And so not just these sins, but even this sin. In fact, all my sins are forgiven because it's a promise of God. And so that's what's going on here with the disciples. He says, because of your little faith. So they still have faith, right? That's not the issue. I think sometimes we believe faith is, this on this line, unless we, from um, 0 to 10, right? And wow, if you're from 0 to 2 or 3, that's so little. Who knows, if that's enough. And so we want to get above 5 or 6 or 7, we tell ourselves. Maybe it has to be 8, 9, 10, and then we're really with Jesus. The reality is we have faith, right? As a Christian, by God's grace, the Spirit has come. You are saved by God's grace. And so, yes, you have faith. It's maybe it is little, maybe it's tiny, but you still have faith. The disciples of Jesus are still His followers. They will still be with Him in eternity. So yes, maybe it's little over here, and it doesn't quite grasp all that Jesus is saying or doing, like the disciples. They couldn't cast out this demon. He chastises them not because they're not believing in terms of that they don't have faith. He's chastising them because, yes, you have faith, and I promise this to you, right? So just exercise that faith in me. Believe my promises to you, and look what can happen. Then he goes on and he says, and nothing will be impossible for you. Uh, we often take this, modern day Christians, and say, oh, well, I can do anything then, and this will prove my faith. So I can tell the fire hydrant to start spurting out water. See, look at this faith I have. I can do anything I want to do. Uh, if that's what you think, you've missed it entirely. We need to take this in context, right? Nothing will be impossible for the disciples to do in terms of what Jesus has promised them they could do. Um, and that's the same for us, for modern day disciples. The same thing is true. Um, Nothing will be impossible for you in terms of what I have promised you could do, in terms of what Jesus has said we can do. That is what we have the authority to do, and that's what they have the authority to do. None of the things I have promised, Jesus is saying, will be impossible for you if you just trust me, right? Just trust me, guys. Okay, 22. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. So the second passion prediction from Jesus, and again, this follows on the heel of what he just said, that they have this a little faith, right? It hasn't become that mustard seed and is growing. That'll happen after the resurrection. Even with that, we still see that the disciples, Peter, especially if we take a look in Paul's letters, Peter struggles at times, right? And I pick on Peter, but we all do, right? But there is that idea of the mustard seed being beginning to grow. So right here, they have that little faith that's not really growing yet, and so they can't really comprehend what Jesus is saying here. Uh, they understand the words, but they're not grasping the gravity and the even the good news in here, right? They will kill him and he'll be raised on the third day. They say they were greatly distressed. It seems they're only focusing on the fact that well, he's going to be gone, right? So they're going to kill you, and we know what happens when people get killed; they're dead. So they kind of seems to be ignoring this whole thing about the resurrection. And again, this goes back to this idea of this little faith. After the resurrection, they can see that all that Jesus has said has happened, has come to fruition, and it'll take off. But right now, they're still struggling. Now they're 24. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" He said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From who do kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" And when he said, "Well, from others," Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself." So the temple tax seems to have its origins back in Nehemiah. Well, so look it up, Nehemiah 10. This whole idea of this temple tax seems to come from. And it increased in about from a third of a shekel to half shekel. About 400 BC, and that seems to be connected to Exodus 30. And so, based on these passages in Nehemiah 10, 32 through 33, Exodus 30, 11 through 16, so these passages in Matthew and historians, right, and a lot of work being done on this, it appears that paying the temple tax expressed one's allegiance to the Jewish community, right, to Judaism, and one's desire to share in the sacrifices made there for the atonement of sin. So I'm identifying with the community. I'm identifying with the sacrifices being done for the atonement of sin. So this whole thing, I pay my tax. This whole thing I am identifying with. I'm associating with. All of this that's going on here is for me. That's what's going on with this tax, and that comes into play here as we go through Jesus's words. So they ask Peter, does he pay the tax? And Peter just says, well, yes, right? And again, we don't know, is Peter just saying yes because Jesus does, or yes, I don't know. It would appear that either way, Peter's answer is just inadequate to what's going on. And that's why he comes in and Jesus addresses Peter first. And he asks him, well, who pays the tax, right? Who pays the toll? The sons or others, right? So the sons of the king, or the sons, or others. And the obvious answer, of course, is, well, of course, the king isn't going to take tax. He's not going to tax his own. He's going to tax the others. So Peter gets it right. He says, well, yeah, it's the others who the tax is collected from. And Jesus says, yes, the sons are free, of course, right? They don't have to pay that tax. And the implication here, of course, we know that Jesus is the Son because the Father has already said, remember back in Mount Transfiguration and earlier in Matthew, he says, "This is my Son." So Jesus is free, right? He doesn't have to pay this tax. We'll talk about that in a second. And by association, those who follow Jesus, those who have put their faith in Jesus, um, they're sons too, right? They're his true family. Remember, we Jesus had that conversation as well. He said, "Who are my brothers, my mother, my sisters? Right? Who are them? Those people. They're the ones who have faith in me, right? They're the ones who trust me, who believe in me. It's not flesh and blood. It's those who have faith in Jesus that are his true family. So Jesus has this divine right as a son. His followers do too. And what he's saying there is, I'm not associated with this temple, with what's happening in the temple here. These sacrifices for atonement of sin do not pertain to me. First of all, I have no sin, right? Jesus is the sinless one. He has no sins to atone for. So yeah, I'm not associating with that. Secondly, it's been corrupted, right? I'm not associating with that. Um, and something greater, as Jesus says, than the temple is here, which is Jesus himself, because he is going to be the sacrifice, right? The atoning sacrifice for the sins of the Jews and of course all people, right? So he is above that, right? Something greater than the temple is here. So therefore, the son is free. I don't pay this tax because I'm not associated with what's happening over there in the temple. Uh, it has no bearing on me and no bearing for me. And as my disciples, therefore, it has no bearing on you either. And so that's this whole thing with the tax. That we're free, we don't have to pay it. Um, and so therefore, right, since Jesus is about to be handed over to be killed, and we're coming on it now, getting closer. Um, there, God no longer desires his people, and of course, certainly afterwards, right? There's no longer a need to sacrifice animals because Jesus is that sacrifice. Um, and Jesus then said, well, hey, so we don't cause offense, go ahead and go get a fish, and you'll find two coins in there to pay our tax. Um, so why not cause offense? My guess is why needlessly get things roiled up because it's getting hotter here in this kitchen, so to speak. The heat's on me more and more, especially as I get closer and closer to Jerusalem, the time of my passion, my crucifixion. And so why just add fuel to fire? Go ahead and find two coins. Interesting to find in the mouth of a fish. I have no idea why why Jesus says, "Hey, go find him in the fish there." I'm sure there is a great reason for it. I just don't know what it is. So that's a puzzle. If you come up with a great reason, give me a shout out. Okay, there we are. That's the end of Matthew 17. Thanks for joining us today. I hope all this as we go through Matthew is enlightening to you. It certainly is for me. I've enjoyed my time. I hope you've enjoyed it too. So have a great day and go with God's peace. See you next time.